And we are back. So we are going to be going into 90 feet. 90 feet is a baseball podcast that Tony and I started a few years ago. Unfortunately, we're not able to continue it just due to some time obligations. It's fine. Life happens. Totally understand. But I wanted to take the time during this marathon to really sit down and go over some of the baseball stuff that I'm missing out. Obviously, I try to influence it and put it into HardFoul Radio, but I don't always get the chance. So the first story, there's some grand scheme things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the MVP race, where I think the just outright lunacy of the Francisco Lindor involvement in the NL MVP race, I think that's crazy. I don't get it. Also, with understanding that a lot of times we pick MVP races too early. But I want to start the return of 90 feet with maybe my favorite baseball storyline of all time. And it's one that only I think about because I spend way too much time thinking about all of this stuff. And that is, in my opinion, the through line of the game's best player. So I grew up watching baseball in the 2000s. The clear best baseball player on the planet for the consistency of the 2000s with Albert Pujols. Miguel Cabrera had a little stretch in there too, but Albert was the guy. Albert Pujols, being as great as he was, I mean, the best hitter on the planet, 3 world championships with the St. Louis Cardinals, did everything. I think his defense sometimes gets talked down about. While I don't think he was some all-world Gold Glove defender, one of the best to ever do it, he was by no means a bad defender in any way, shape, and or form. He just wasn't a, take your pick for everyone to consider the best guy at first base. He's not in that upper echelon category. But as far as a hitter, a player, even a very good base runner, even though, again, he's not stealing a lot of bases, but just his impact with the bat was far and above everybody else. Now, when did Albert stop being the best player? Well, he won a title with the St. Louis Cardinals, and all anyone could think about was, is he stay? Does he go? What's going to happen? What is Albert Pujols' reality? And the reality of Albert Pujols was he could stay with the Cardinals, but he probably wasn't going to make as much as he could somewhere else. Or he could go somewhere else and break the bank. And he did. He signed a very lucrative contract to the Los Angeles Angels. Immediate decline of Albert Pujols when he became a Los Angeles Angel. He was great, best player in the sport, and then he gets to the Angels, and it's an entirely different player. Well, yes, he still had a few good seasons left in him. He did hit 40 home runs one year. He was clearly never the guy that was batting 320, 330, 35 to 45 home runs, best player in the sport. That player was gone. Just was. But he was playing with this young kid named Mike Trout. Now, I've said this story a bunch before, but I'll repeat it just because I think it just adds the context so well. Tony and I were playing Xbox, and we had ESPN on to the side, and Buzz Drolny said, hey, the guy the Angels just called up, they believe might be the best player in baseball. And, of course, we laughed. We thought it was stupid. We're like, there's no way. And that player ended up becoming Mike Trout, who became the best player in baseball. It was insane to think about. And Trout went on almost single-handedly taking the throne from Albert, who he was playing with, and just excelled and became just that, the best player in the game. We all know the beginning of Trout's career, how historic of a start he got off to. I believe from 2011 to 2020, when baseball did their best player rankings, Trout was never lower than 2. Like, that's how great he was. He was so great, there was 2 other guys at the same time as him, Manny Machado, Bryce Harper, who are great players. Harper's going to be a Hall of Famer, greatness in their own right. And they were still never on Trout's level. Best player in the sport for a decade, unquestioned. And at the end, now Mike Trout, unfortunately, his story is a little different than Albert's. While Albert did suffer some injuries, I don't know if there's not a clear correlation to say that's why Albert declined. But Trout, on his decline, has clearly been due to injuries. When Trout started to decline, the Angels signed this guy out of Japan, Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani took about 5 seconds to show why he's one of the best players in the sport. A, he was a two-way player, which we had not seen on a serious level at the professional level since I mean, it's literally just, it's him and it's Babe Ruth. Those are your guys. And Shohei was so great, so quick, that he took that mantle from Trout to him as the best player in the sport. And this is just, again, this is the kind of stuff that only I spend too much time thinking about, but it just always was intriguing to me. It's like Pujols to Trout, Trout to Ohtani. So that means in about 10 years when his Dodger contract expires, let's see who the Dodgers have as a young player. That guy, he gonna be the best player in the sport. Like, it's just a very funny storyline and great. Now we have an excessive heat warning again. We're just gonna be hot out here forever in California. So again, I've always thought that was a really interesting through line. And Shohei, to his credit, where they're all so unique is they're all multi-talented. Like, Shohei, obviously, two-way player, can't dispute it. Pujols is probably the least in terms of multi-talented. He was just that much better than everybody else hitting a baseball. Again, his defense wasn't crazy Gold Glove worthy, a consistent Gold Glover, but his bat and his consistency is next to none, second to none. Trout, obviously, early in his career, the base running, stealing a lot of bases, hitting for power, hitting for contact, multiple MVPs. Where Trout is unfortunately going to lose out when I think all three of these guys are in debate for the greatest players. I think they're the greatest player of their era, bar none. When you start to compare them against the other greatest players of their era, Trout's going to lose out on where was the team's success. And that's valid. The Angels, unfortunately, I just don't think are a really good organization, considering the amount of talent they've had through that organization to have as little success. The NBA comparison would be something like the Thunder, but I think the Thunder story is still different. Yes, the Thunder had Westbrook, Harden, Durant, SGA, Paul George, all these different guys who had MVP level seasons while they were there, but due to contracts and age and LeBron James in his prime, different things prevented them from getting there, and they still at least made an NBA Finals with those original three, Harden, Russ, Durant. The Angels can't even get into the playoffs most years of Trout. So that itself is disappointing, and that's where I think Trout's going to lose a lot of points. But that through line has always been something to me where I'm like, yeah, it literally went Pujols to playing with young Trout to Trout taking over, then Trout to young Ohtani, and now Ohtani's running it. And can we talk about Ohtani for a second? So we're going to discuss this MVP conversation that I just think is ludicrous, because while I would agree you can pick an MVP award too early. I do. I think a lot of times, it happens in all sports, it happens in the NFL, it happens in basketball, it happens in baseball. We just decide that, oh, the guy having the best season with like a month to go or 2 months to go, that's the MVP. And while normally, because guys can slump, guys can have a bad game, and a lot of MVP, it's not exactly a numbers thing, but let's be honest, a lot of it has to do with the numbers. But Ohtani, where I think he's different, is if you want to choose a true valuable, it's Ohtani, and it's not close. Now, Lindor's had a great season, and I think there's a lot of, like, Lindor's been great. This is not a bash Francisco Lindor segment. But where Ohtani, who's clearly having the better year statistically, who is having a better season wins-wise, right? So those are your, normally you could make this argument if your guy is either, if your guy is winning more or maybe statistically better, but he's got less wins. Those are normally the arguments to join in. Okay. And then, and I'm not saying they haven't had their own, because I hate that MVPs, and I understand it's impossible not to, but they shouldn't be comparative metrics. And I know that sounds weird. If I go to a job and I say, act like you're asking for a raise, I think most people say, well, I deserve this raise because I'm better than so and so, or I'm better than them, or I do this better than that, or I'm doing this for you. And it's always comparative because I think naturally people compare, and I think in a social media era we compare even more than what's obviously any reasonable kind of healthy. When the reality should be, this is what I provide, this is what I do, this is why I'm, worth what you should pay me. I'm not comparing myself to anyone. I'm not a bar for anyone. I am my own standard. I set my own standard. And that's where it should be. Ohtani on his own merits is going to be, presumably, the first 50-50 season in Major League Baseball history. Yes, is he a DH? Fine. I get that. Baseball fans and purists, I understand that. We don't want a DH winning because he doesn't play defense. Okay, find someone whose defense is so good that if there is which there's going to be, a 15-plus home run gap and a 15-plus stolen base gap, and again, I don't want to do the comparison stuff. 50-50 as a DH is wild. It is. It just is. Lindor has had a great year, and the Mets should be extremely happy they got him. But the MVP race is over. I'm doing 50-50 while rehabbing? You ever take time off of work and still lead the company in sales? Like, it's just not... It's not feasible. It's not possible by anyone but this player. And now I will say this. A lot of people use the comparison, or not the comparison, I'm using the comparison. A lot of people talk about last year with the Kansas City Chiefs. That was the year to get them. Why? Because their offense wasn't very good. Well, this was the year to get Ohtani for an MVP. Because guess what he's doing next year? He's pitching again. So what if, let's say, because pitching, it's a little more energy off him. So let's say he pitches. Let's give him I don't know. Let's give him just his regular pitching does as a major league pitcher. Okay? So that means I get, as a pitcher from Ohtani, which is quality innings, a lot of strikeouts, low ERA, and I get 40-40, this is the year to get MVP. This is the year to get him for MVP. And no one's going to get him because, again, 50-50 in your off year, and his is off not because he's struggling, his is off because Tommy John surgery. Like, it's crazy to think about what he's doing right now. And I'm supposed to believe someone else is going to catch him for MVP? Man, look. I have more of a belief that you could catch Aaron Judge despite the historic season he was on. Obviously, he's been in a bit of a slump. But there's more validity to open up the AL MVP conversation than there is to open up the NL MVP conversation. This is Ohtani's award to win. And because he is coming back to pitch next year, this is just his award. You have to do something like, he is going to set the standard. He is going to be 15-plus wins, an ERA, high 2s, low 3s, while doing 40-40. Like, that's just, he is going to reset the standard for what you got to do to be the most valuable player in the National League. We'll take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about some other guys who I think deserve some love, Bobby Witt Jr. and others, as well as do some little talk about the standings heading into the playoffs. This is 90 Feet. We back. And we are back. This is 90 feet. Excuse me. We got A&M coming over to this too. I'm really excited about that. Gonna get all my little 90s anime topics off. Last thing I want to do before I really get into like the current. Obviously, I talked about some current with the MVP conversation, but then also some prior, which is like my little through line because I like that kind of shit. The last thing I want to talk about really that's I guess old baseball news is the trend going on right now online, and I thought this was hilarious to me. The rise of it's not the rise of the trend online is people talking about excuse me there we go the trend online about people talking about like the late 2000s baseball players. A bunch of people putting up stuff like I saw Kevin Youkilis one. Tony and I were talking about Asdrubal Cabrera. There was a guy who posted a picture of Jared Weaver, and I was like, yo, solid career. And him and I were laughing because him and I do that stuff all the time. And it's super funny, and it does really make you think about the guys that, there's a lot of guys who just have good careers. And people remember good careers. I know current media makes you think, oh, the only thing people remember or care about is the guys who, were Hall of Famers or winning multiple championships, stuff like that. No, the average fan actually remembers a lot of the just good guys, the AJ Pierzynskis, Paul Konerko, for my White Sox fans that are suffering right now. If you want to go to Jacoby Ellsbury, I said Tony bringing up Asdrubal Cabrera. I could give you Carlos Pena, Casey Kochman, Akinori Omori. Like, there's guys on every single team. I guess even Andre Ethier is probably now just in the solid career, which is funny because I used to be like the Dodgers' best player until Kemp took off. Like, guys like that. And to a lot of fans, like, those guys are, it's hard to call them glue guys because at different stages of their career, they are one of the best players on the team. They're just really good. Chase Headley for the Padres. I'm based in, team he probably used to play for without giving away my location. Like, guys like that. Right, Jake Peavy, you go down the list. But I also, and maybe this is just my pessimism, as you see these kind of things trend, I'm like, who are those guys for today? Who are the guys that are just good players that that people are gonna remember in 10 years? And now I'm not really talking to the baseball purist, the guy that memorizes every single roster. I used to do that too when I was in high school. Not talking to the guy that's watching games day in, day out. I used to do that too. But as your life gets busier, as you go older, you get married, you have kids, etc., and life will turn you into the casual fan before you ever turn yourself into one. Again, you're going to have relationships, you're going to have possibly children, you're going to have more bills than you know what to do with. You're going to have all these different things that are going to make you become a casual fan because you're not going to have the kind of time that you can give to watching sports 24/7. I've gone through this, and I'm trying to make a career out of this. The reality is, who are those guys? And I think baseball needs to understand, and again, I know I rip baseball all the time whenever I talk about it, but just let's be honest, a lot of things baseball does, it deserves it. You have to be able to market better, make these guys people want to come watch, make these guys people are going to want to remember. Like, it can't just all be Shohei and Mike Trout and Bryce Harper. Like, these are the kind of, yes, those guys will be remembered forever. They're great. They kind of do this independently of you having to do anything. But for the current modern player who's just good, not great, but might still be a big part of a team, like, who are those guys? Who are those guys? And how is baseball helping to keep them relevant long term? Again, baseball was the number one sport in America. It's now tied with the WNBA. I'm sure they do slightly better numbers, but there's far more teams. On a per team basis, if you really took out the Dodgers, Giants, the Yankees, what does baseball per team numbers really look like? What do they look like? What's their attendance? What's their viewership? The stuff that has to matter to you. What does it look like? Again, the game's fun online. I love talking about those baseball players, that era. Brandon Phillips. I know Joey Votto just retired, but he's so old he did play back then. But now I'm watching games and I'm like, who's the guy? I really like Kevin Kiermaier. But is the world going to remember Kevin Kiermaier? Or is someone going to randomly bring up Kevin Kiermaier in 10 years? See what I mean? Like Johnny Damon. John Damon's not an all-time great. He's not some, in the history of baseball kind of guy. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing, baseball? Sorry. I will stop just complaining about baseball for about 5 seconds. I apologize, guys. I love baseball. I do. Can we also... Let's pick a division. Let's pick one. Let's start